A narcissistic woman does not become obsessed with kindness, loyalty, or even love in the way most people understand it. What captures her attention and refuses to release it is resistance. Specifically, the moment she realizes she cannot fully control someone. Control for her is not a preference, it is psychological oxygen. When her charm, guilt, withdrawal, or emotional pressure fails to bend someone's inner compass, something unsettling happens inside her. The usual script breaks. From a Jungian perspective, this is where the ego collides with the shadow. She expects others to mirror back her superiority, her desirability, her narrative of power. But when someone remains emotionally steady, when they don't overreact, don't beg for reassurance, and don't twist themselves to earn approval, that person becomes an anomaly, an unresolved symbol. Her mind cannot file them away as defeated, so it keeps returning to them. This obsession isn't admiration, it's unfinished business. The inability to dominate creates a psychological gap, and the psyche hates gaps. She replays conversations, imagines alternate outcomes, and constructs fantasies of eventual control, not because she wants the person back, but because she needs to restore the illusion that she was never powerless. What makes this even more disturbing is that the resistance doesn't have to be loud. In fact, quiet strength is the most destabilizing. Calm boundaries, emotional self-regulation, and the refusal to explain or justify yourself communicate something deeply threatening. I do not need you to define me. That message lingers. So if there's one thing to understand here, it's this. The people she stays obsessed with are not the ones who fought her hardest, but the ones who stood firm without fighting at all. And that raises a question worth sitting with. Are you trying to win against control, or are you becoming immune to it? After control fails, the next thing that unsettles a narcissistic woman is emotional independence. Not independence as a slogan, but the quiet, lived reality of someone who does not require her approval to feel whole. From the outside, this looks simple: calm behavior, measured responses, a life that continues without disruption. Psychologically, however, it strikes at the core of her inner structure. In Jungian terms, her sense of self is built largely through reflection. She needs to be mirrored as important, desired, irreplaceable. When someone's emotional stability does not rise or fall with her attention, that mirror disappears, and without it, insecurity rushes in. She may still receive admiration from others, but it feels thinner, less convincing, because one person has demonstrated that her validation is not essential. What's important to understand is that emotional independence cannot be performed. It cannot be faked through silence while internally craving recognition. The psyche senses incongruence. True independence shows itself in subtle ways: a lack of urgency, the absence of emotional bargaining, and the ability to hold boundaries without hostility. These signals communicate something profoundly unsettling to someone who relies on emotional leverage. There is nothing to pull. This is why emotionally independent individuals linger in her mind. They represent a possibility she avoids confronting, that worth can exist without external confirmation. Rather than inspiring growth, this awareness often provokes envy and quiet resentment. She may attempt to reinsert herself not out of affection, but to test whether that independence was real. For the listener, the implication is clear. Emotional independence is not about appearing detached. It is about becoming internally anchored. And once you are anchored, you no longer react. You choose. That is the point where obsession begins for her, and freedom begins for you. One of the most misunderstood triggers of narcissistic obsession is the refusal to chase. Most people assume that distance provokes pursuit, that silence automatically creates desire. But in this context, it's not the silence itself, it's what the silence represents. When someone walks away without pleading, without demanding explanations, and without trying to correct the narrative, the narcissistic mind is left without its usual points of leverage. From a Jungian lens, this creates what could be called a psychological echo. The narcissistic woman is accustomed to provoking reactions: emotion, confusion, defensiveness, longing. These responses confirm her impact, but when none arrive, the psyche encounters a void, and the mind does not tolerate voids easily. It fills them with rumination, imagined dialogue, and unresolved tension. The person who did not chase becomes a mental presence precisely because they are no longer physically or emotionally available. What intensifies this effect is dignity, not dramatic withdrawal, not cold hostility, but a clean exit. No final speech, no emotional reckoning, no effort to be understood. This is deeply destabilizing because it removes her ability to rewrite events in real time. Without your engagement, she cannot shape your perception or her own sense of victory. Importantly, this is not about manipulation or playing hard to get. Those strategies still orbit her approval. True non-chasing arises when clarity replaces attachment, when you recognize that explanation will not produce understanding and pursuit will not restore balance. Your nervous system settles and your attention returns to your own life. This is why such individuals become psychological ghosts. They didn't disappear out of weakness, but out of self-respect. And that leaves a lasting imprint. So the question to carry forward is simple. Are you withholding your presence to provoke a reaction, or are you reclaiming it because you finally know its value? Another category of people a narcissistic woman remains fixated on are those who clearly had a life beyond her. Not in a performative sense, not as a threat or display, but as a quiet fact: purpose, direction, work, values, inner momentum. These things signal something deeply unsettling to someone who needs to be the psychological center of every relationship. From a Jungian standpoint, this touches the issue of individuation. A person who is moving toward their own center cannot easily be pulled into another's orbit. Their sense of meaning does not depend on relational drama or emotional intensity. For a narcissistic woman, this feels like irrelevance, and irrelevance is intolerable when one's identity depends on being indispensable. What creates obsession here is not rejection, but non-necessity. When someone enjoys her presence but does not require it to function, her usual strategies lose effectiveness. Attention withdrawal no longer produces panic. Validation no longer buys loyalty. Even conflict fails to derail the person from their path. This forces her into an uncomfortable comparison. She sees someone grounded in something real, while she remains dependent on reaction and reflection. This dynamic often reveals itself in subtle tests. She may attempt to disrupt routines, question priorities, or provoke emotional crises to see whether she can still pull the person away from their purpose. When these attempts fail, the fixation deepens. The individual becomes symbolic, not just of lost control, but of a life that appears self-directed and internally fueled. For the listener, the lesson is not to become emotionally unavailable or dismissive of connection, but to ensure that connection is not the foundation of identity. When your life has weight, direction, and meaning independent of anyone else's approval, you stop being easily displaced. And that is the paradox worth remembering. The more complete your life becomes, the less anyone can claim ownership over your attention, and the more powerful your presence truly is. There is a particular kind of person who leaves a lasting imprint on a narcissistic woman's psyche. The one who sees clearly and responds calmly, not with accusation, not with moral outrage, and not with a need to expose her publicly, but with quiet recognition and firm limits. This is deeply unsettling because it bypasses the defenses she relies on. Drama can be dismissed, anger can be reframed, and emotional chaos can be weaponized. Clarity cannot. From a Jungian perspective, this moment represents a confrontation with the false self. The narcissistic persona is a carefully constructed mask designed to secure admiration and control. When someone recognizes the pattern behind the performance and refuses to participate in it, the mask loses its function. And when that recognition comes without hostility, air is nowhere for projection to land. What makes this especially destabilizing is restraint. The person does not try to diagnose her, argue her intentions, or convince her to change. They simply adjust their behavior. Boundaries are set without explanation. Access is reduced without punishment. The message is implicit but unmistakable. I see what is happening, and I am choosing myself. This removes her ability to cast herself as victim or misunderstood heroine. Such individuals become difficult to forget because they represent truth without aggression. They did not need to win. They did not need to be right. They did not seek validation for leaving. In psychological terms, they refused to play a role in the narcissistic narrative, and that refusal lingers as an unresolved tension. For those listening, this point is crucial. You do not need to expose, explain, or correct a narcissistic person to reclaim your power. Insight paired with action is enough, and perhaps the most important reflection is this. When you stop trying to change someone and start changing your position, you don't just exit the pattern, you quietly dismantle it. The final group a narcissistic woman remains preoccupied with are those who did not just leave, but evolved. People who took the rupture as a turning point rather than a wound. This is not about public success or visible achievement, but about an inner shift that quietly alters one's entire orientation to life. When someone emerges stronger, clearer, and more self-directed after the relationship, it creates a psychological disturbance she cannot easily neutralize. From a Jungian perspective, this touches the process of individuation, the movement toward becoming a whole, integrated self. For the narcissistic woman, relationships are often used to stabilize a fragile inner world. When a former partner no longer reflects her importance, but instead reflects their own growth, the old narrative collapses. She can no longer position herself as the source of their confidence, meaning, or identity. What makes this particularly haunting is the absence of resentment. Growth that comes with bitterness can be dismissed as reaction. Growth marked by calm, self-respect, and forward momentum signals something deeper. The relationship was not formative in the way she imagined. The individual did not need to recover from her. They needed to return to themselves. That realization quietly erodes her sense of influence. This is why she may watch from a distance, test the waters, or attempt to reappear. Not necessarily to reconnect, but to verify whether the transformation is real. And when it is, the fixation hardens, not into desire, but into a persistent awareness of lost relevance. For the listener, this is where the entire arc of the speech resolves. The most powerful response to narcissistic dynamics is not resistance, exposure, or revenge, but integration. When you use the experience to deepen self-knowledge and strengthen inner alignment, you close the psychological loop. And the final thought to leave with is this. When you grow beyond the need to be seen, you become unforgettable to those who needed you to stay small.